الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله الكريم. قال الله تعالى: ولوطا آتيناه حكما وعلما ونجيناه من القرية التي كانت تعمل الخبائث. وقال في شأن إبراهيم عليه السلام: ونجيناه ولوطا إلى الأرض التي باركنا فيها للعالمين. وقال في شأن قوم لوط خطابا للنبي عليه الصلاة والسلام: لعمرك إنهم لفي سكرتهم يعمهون. وقال النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام: من رأى منكم منكرا فليغيره بيده، فإن لم يستطع فبلسانه، فإن لم يستطع فبقلبه، وذلك أضعف الإيمان. وكما قال النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام. We begin as always by praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, sending salawat and salam on our beloved Master Muhammad, his honorable companions, noble family, and all those who tread the straight path. May Allah make us from them and keep us among them. Ameen. Every salah that we pray, we recite something in the last posture of salah. We recite the Ibrahimiyya. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim. Now, when you say wa ala ali Ibrahim, the family of Ibrahim alayhi salam, who is implied? So we say, okay, Ibrahim alayhi salam is implied. His son Ishaq, his mother Sarah, Ishaq's mother Sarah, the son Ismail, Ismail's mother Hajar, and then normally we think that's it. But he also had a nephew. So he had two brothers. One was older than him, one was younger than him. Ibrahim alayhi salam's younger brother Haran had a son, and that son was a person who later on followed Ibrahim alayhi salam and learned from him on how to give da'wah. Okay. So Ibrahim alayhi salam had a nephew, Haran's brother, who followed him and learned how to give da'wah, and then he became a Nabi in his own capacity, and that was Lūt alayhi salam. So today's topic is going to be about Lūt alayhi salam and to which people he was sent to, and how does that help us take guidance. So Lūt alayhi salam was sent. وَنَجَّيْنَاهُ وَلُوطًا إِلَى الْأَرْضِ الَّتِي بَارَكْنَا فِيهَا لِلْعَالَمِينَ. He was sent from Iraq, where him and his uncle and his entire family was living, to the Mubarak place of Sham. Ibrahim alayhi salam was in Jerusalem, and then he went to Mecca afterwards, and he went back to Jerusalem. He was in that area. But about 125 kilometers away from Jerusalem is a city called Sadum, and that's where Lūt alayhi salam was sent as a prophet. His wife was from those people. She was Sadumiya, and they had two daughters. So this was Lūt alayhi salam's family, and this is where he was. And he was sent there to tell them and remind them about Allah and to stop them from doing the wrongs that they were doing. Now, you would understand this by looking at the ayah that وَلُوطًا إِذْ قَالَ لِقَوْمِهِ إِنَّكُمْ لَتَأْتُونَ الْفَاحِشَةَ مَا سَبَقَكُمْ بِهَا مِنْ أَحَدٍ مِنَ الْعَالَمِينَ. His approach to them was that of showing them the mirror. That look at what you're doing. This is something that is unprecedented. No human has ever done this action. So he tried to make them aware of what they were doing by showing them the mirror. This is what you're doing, that's it. They didn't take lesson from there. They said, no, well, we're doing what we want to do. How is it any of your business? What two people do behind closed doors, that's not your concern. That's the thing we hear, objection we hear. And Lūt alayhi salam, so Ibn Kathir rahimahullah mentions this in al-Bidayah wa al-Nihayah. He says that Lūt alayhi salam, the thing that he was sent to these people to address and to make them aware of their disobedience, they were doing lots of things. The Quran, when it explains it as al-qaryati allati kanat ta'malu al-khaba'ith, khabith things, disgusting things that these people were doing. One is the sin that they were engaged in. But besides that, they would do a lot of other disgusting things, like they would pass wind in public in a gathering that they would have. They wouldn't consider anything. They had become completely, they had no conscience and morals and ethics. They felt no shame in what they would do. They would just do it. You know, one is like you do something bad in private, but then you have a reputation to maintain in public, so you won't do that in public. They had none of that. For them to do something wrong in their homes versus to do something in a gathering of 100 people was all the same. They had none of it. They had no conscience. So when he told them not to do this, And it wasn't just a few people that were doing it. It was the city of Sadum and 4 neighboring villages, which people in the thousands that were doing it on a wholesale level. Now, when you say everybody was doing it, well, then they would have to have women. So women, to speak of this in a way that befits the honor of the masjid, that the men would engage in this sin with men, and then in the same way they would engage with this sin, in the sin with the women that they had. Right? So they wouldn't go the permissible route of getting, fulfilling one's, carnal needs with their spouse or their wife. They would go the other route, and there's something that the Quran explains it, that they were so drunk with the sin. لَعَمْرُكَ إِنَّهُمْ لَفِي سَكْرَتِهِمْ يَعْمَهُونَ. Rasulullah is being addressed. The only place in the Quran that Allah takes an oath on the life of Rasulullah that these people were absolutely drunk in their addiction to this sin. So what was their response to him? Their response to him when he tried to tell them you're doing something wrong was to cancel him. Okay. Political correctness started over there. To cancel him. They said, you don't tell us what to do. We're going to make your life difficult. You're not allowed to attend any of our gatherings. You're not allowed to have any guests in your house. We're putting restrictions on you. We're sanctioning you. This was their response. And we'll fast forward to where those 3 guests came. They came to Ibrahim a.s. and they told him that we're being sent to Lūt a.s. And he said, but Lūt is there. نَحْنُ أَعْلَمُ بِمَنْ فِيهَا. We know who's there. We know who's Lūt a.s. But we're going to destroy that city. And then they came to the city gates. Now this is all mentioned in the Bidayah wa Nihayah. So they came to the city gates, 3 young people, angels in the form of 3 young people, and attractive, handsome young people of good facial features. And they came by the city gates, and one of the 2 daughters of Lūt a.s. came there. And they said that we want to visit your father and we want to stay at his house. So she said, okay, hold on over here. It was evening, it was around Maghrib time. She said, hold on, don't come in the city yet. She went to get her father. She said, there are 3 people who want to stay at our house. I told them to stay outside the city. Don't come in the city because we know what happens to young men when they enter our city. Kind of twisted, right now they tell young women don't go out in certain areas because your honor is at risk. That time, to be a young man, you were a victim. You would be considered a victim. So Lūt a.s. came to the city gates and received them and told them, okay, I'm not really allowed to have any guests because I've been put sanctions have been put on me from the city, but you can come to my house quickly. So he brought him in the house. Now Lūt a.s.'s wife was a woman who was a disbeliever. She wasn't engaged in that sin that they were engaged in, but she was an ally. Right? You look at, some schools have the GSA, the Something Straight Alliance. She would have founded that at that time, right? If that was something. So she was an ally. She was an advocate for them, even though she wasn't actively involved. So when she found out that Lūt a.s. had young men that he was hosting, she went and she told the people that, hey, there's 3 young men, come, enjoy. So they came to the house and they said that, didn't we tell you can't have any guests? Now it's too late. We're going and you know what we want. So he said, فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَلَا تُخْزُونِي فِي ضَيْفِي. And to understand this properly, imagine you're hosting some people in your house. Your neighbors, there's a mob that's at your doorstep. They're like, we want their flesh. How bad would you feel powerless to help them, unless you're carrying Second Amendment, unless you can actually fend them off? Wouldn't you feel humiliated that you have guests that you have afforded protection in your home and you've given them hospitality and sanctuary, and your people outside want to come inside? So naturally, Lūt a.s. was very worried about for the well-being of these people. So he tried negotiating, discussing with them. He said, if you want, there are women that you can get married to. He said, no, you know what we want. So then the angels, eventually they made their presence known, that we aren't just young people who won't be able to defend ourselves. They won't be able to reach you, don't worry. Eventually they got through. Allah says, فَطَمَسْنَا أَعْيُنَهُمْ. He blinded them. The angels, Allah through the angels blinded these people who tried to enter Lūt a.s.'s home. And then Ibn Kathir mentions that they touched the hitan, the walls, and they came out, and everybody outside saw that, well, these people just went in and they were blinded. So we can't go in. So they backtracked. It was still nighttime. They backtracked and they went back. Those 3 angels, Jibreel a.s., Mikael a.s., and Israfil a.s., they told Lūt a.s. that you, your 2 daughters, exit before sahur, around sahur time, before fajr. So they left. And his wife remained behind. And then Jibreel alayhi salam with one wing lifted the entire city as well as the neighboring villages. It lifted it up really high, turned it upside down, and it fell. And this is how Lūt alayhi salam's people were destroyed because of the immorality that they were stubborn to continue doing. Now, fast forward to 2023. We take some lessons from how Lūt alayhi salam behaved with people who were suffering from this sickness. The first thing he did, this comes in Surah Al-Qasas. First thing he did was Surah Al-Shu'ara. فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَأَطِيعُونِ. He reminded them of Allah, reminded them of a moral standard, a higher being. The second thing, said أَتَأْتُونَ الذُّكْرَانَ مِنَ الْعَالَمِينَ. He focused on the action, not the feeling that they had, not the impulse that they had to commit wrong. Because some people may have that feeling of being attracted to a similar gender. It becomes condemnable when they act on it. So he said, أَتَأْتُونَ الذُّكْرَانَ. You're doing this action. And then after mentioning that action, he gave them a solution. He treated it like how a medical practitioner would treat a sickness. He analyzed it, he found the issue, and then he said, وَتَذَرُونَ مَا خَلَقَ لَكُمْ رَبُّكُمْ مِنْ أَزْوَاجِكُمْ. The cure for this is you go and you seek intimacy through your lawfully wedded spouse. Halal partners that Allah has created for you. مَا خَلَقَ لَكُمْ رَبُّكُمْ مِنْ أَزْوَاجِكُمْ. When they were still arrogant and stubborn and they didn't want to, the fourth thing we learn from the legacy of Lūt alayhi salam is إِنِّي لِعَمَلِكُمْ مِنَ الْقَالِينَ. You guys do what you want, أَيْ مِنَ الْمُبْغِضِينَ. I am clear in my stance, I detest this action that you are doing. Okay. Now we come to the LGBTQ issue and Pride Month and June. Before beginning the second part of my discussion, I want to remind ourselves that alhamdulillah in Canada we've got the freedom of charter and rights and the freedom of speech that allows us to speak about things and allows others to speak about things. It's actually completely fine for us to mention these details from the minbar in a Jumu'ah platform publicly. It becomes hate speech when you incite someone to do something wrong. And over here in this gathering, I'm not inciting anybody to do anything wrong. I am merely reminding ourselves of Lūt alayhi salam's struggle with his people, and then awareness on how, as Muslims, we should behave this month. Okay? So there's no incitement towards violence that's happening over here. Disclaimer for anybody who wants to look for something to fight about. Now, we look at the history of this movement. Up until 1950s, this was considered a psychological disease. The American Psychological Handbook of Diseases actually considers it a psychopathic disorder up until 1952. After that was the something revolution from 1960s and 70s, where people wanted to challenge the norms of marriage and the foundation of family unit. And then you had hippies and you had people who wanted to argue that basically first wave feminism and second wave feminism, where women wanted to have, the feminist movement and all of that, where they wanted to have fun and not deal with the repercussions of having children. So that was 60s and 70s. Then it became, so in 1968, it became considered a something orientation disturbance. And by 1975, it was completely out of the book of psychological diseases. And the person at that time who was the chairman of it, he said that political correctness rules, not science. And now we look at it and we study it a bit and we see, okay, what was the point of this, this lobbying movement, this agenda? What was the point of it? Why did these people try so hard to get their voices through? So obviously there was financial benefit to it. It's a whole Pride Month itself is a whole different thing. There's a lot of money that goes into it and a lot of money that can be gained from doing this. The second thing is population control. And the third thing is spreading and normalizing immorality. You look at drag events that happen in libraries. What's the point of it? To introduce kids to something, and then eventually, does that child still maintain that fitrah that he's born on? Not really. Nature versus nurture. I mentioned a few common objections, and then inshallah we'll wrap it up. The first common objection or question that you get from people who are, not people who are suffering from this, people who are arrogant and proud in this sickness, is that they say that they have a gene, or they have natural inclination, naturally occurring desires. What can they do? They just have it. So to answer that, as Muslims, as humans, we believe in fitrah, natural temperament, natural characteristics that we have. We have an inclination to the opposite gender. It's natural. But for argument's sake, if there was a gene, and then the gene was disproven, by the way, there is no gay gene, but if there was a gene like that, then if somebody claimed to have a murder gene within them, that their gene they have in their DNA, it's just within them that they want to commit murder, would that serve as a defense in a court of law? It wouldn't. Somebody had a claim to have a gene that it's a rape gene. They just have it. Their father had it, their grandfather had it, and they're just serial rapists. It wouldn't serve. It wouldn't stand in a court of law. You can't claim defense on something because maybe this gene exists. So that's the first thing. The second thing some people say is that animals do it, or some animals do it. The objection is so absurd because if, as ashraful makhluk, as humans, we define our morals and our ethics in actions that are in conformity to animals, then we are truly a lost cause. وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. Allah has made humans the best of creation, and now we're saying, no. We're not going to follow moral standards that Allah has given us. We're going to look at what the animals are doing. If you want to do that, the mantis, the female mantis, when it mates, while it's mating, it devours the male mantis's head, right? And there's an article that it eats it like apple. It doesn't just eat the whole thing, it eats it like apple. And then you look at the black widow, and when it mates, it does a similar thing where it poisons its mate and it spins its web around it and it consumes it. So how is it that Muslims are going to take moral guidance from animals when animals are a lesser creation? Allah has not made them to think like how. Allah has not given them the ability to know what's right or wrong. Humans have that. So that's the second thing. The third thing, so people say that if two people do what they want behind closed doors, then how is it anybody else's business? So in answer to that, we say that if there are siblings who want to do something wrong, who want to have relations behind closed doors, it's illegal. According to Canada's legal system, incest is illegal. Marriage to somebody of your close relative is illegal. It is illegal in most countries. If a 2-year-old girl is in a position where she wants to, or she engages in something with somebody much older behind closed doors, do we consider that fine? Or do we say, no, we have to draw the line somewhere. We have to draw the line somewhere. To remind ourselves of the fact that not whatever happens behind closed doors is fine. It's Allah has set objective standards, morals, and ethics. Secular, countries and societies, they will set subjective morals and ethics. We follow what Allah has said. Okay? And then the fourth point, if somebody does have feelings, how do we look at that? As Muslims, if a Muslim has feelings, like how we treat other sicknesses, you tell a person that you seek treatment. You get help that you need, whether it's conversion therapy, reintegrative therapy, whatever type of therapy, whatever word you want to call it. It is a process. Like how if a person has any other type of sickness, we don't blame him for being sick. Right? And as a medical practitioner, you don't go to the doctor's office, the doctor tells you, why are you this? Unless a person has something that they did themselves. You tell the person, okay, this is what you have, and this is the treatment that you need to do. So for the fourth thing, if a person is sick, a person has a sickness, then they would seek treatment. Islam won't banish a person and say, because you are feeling this sickness, you're out of the fold. No. But if a person is stubborn and wants to continue doing what they're doing and say that no, in Islam you're allowed to freedom of whatever. No. Well, that's just wrong. Again, not preaching hatred or incitement over here, just mentioning facts for us to understand. And the last point is, okay, how do we as Muslims, how do we behave with people of this community? So we look at Lūt alayhi salam and how he behaved with them. He treated them as non-Muslims who don't know better, so need to be guided and shown the teachings of Islam. Okay? He was not their ally in what they did. You know who was his ally in what they did? His wife, Lūt alayhi salam's wife. And we know what happened to her. So we ask Allah to protect us, our children, and our grandchildren, and our offspring from all of these fitnas that are occurring, and to give us the strength and courage to remain steadfast. Ameen.